The projector light flickered against the conference room wall as Trent Hoffman's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I stood near the window, my presentation notes gripped tightly in my hand, watching 30 pairs of eyes turn toward me. "We cannot afford people who lack loyalty to this company's vision," he announced, his voice carrying across the entire floor through the open door. My stomach dropped. Heat crawled up my neck as co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their laptops. Trent pointed directly at me, his expression cold and calculated. "Effective immediately, Maya is being removed from the Westfield project." The words hit me like a punch. My throat tightened. The presentation I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting suddenly felt worthless in my trembling hands. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Around me, people avoided my gaze, pretending to check their phones or shuffle papers. This wasn't just criticism. This was public execution. And I had no idea what I'd done to deserve it. My name is Maya Sinclair, and before that moment, I'd spent 7 years building something I was proud of at Innovations Tech. I'd started as a junior analyst fresh out of college, working my way up through late nights and weekends nobody else wanted to sacrifice. I'd created the client retention program that saved us from losing our 3 biggest accounts during the market crash 2 years ago. I'd trained half the people in that conference room, walking them through their first presentations and covering their mistakes when they were still learning. But apparently none of that mattered anymore. One man had decided I wasn't loyal enough, and with those words, he'd stripped away 7 years of credibility in front of everyone who mattered. What Trent didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. He had no idea who he was really talking to. And by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. Trent Hoffman had arrived at our company 6 weeks earlier, brought in as the new vice president of operations. The announcement came on a Monday morning, delivered through a company-wide email that praised his impressive track record at previous firms. I remembered watching him walk into our floor for the first time. His suit was expensive, his hair perfectly styled, his handshake firm and practiced. He made eye contact with everyone during introductions, his smile wide and confident. Except when he looked at me. When our eyes met, something shifted in his expression. The smile tightened. His gaze moved past me quickly, dismissively, like I was furniture he'd already decided to replace. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself he was just adjusting to a new environment. I was wrong on both counts. That brief moment of dismissal was the first warning sign I completely missed. The first real cut came 3 days after Trent started. I'd been leading the Westfield project for 8 months, guiding it through budget reviews and timeline adjustments with careful attention to every detail. The client trusted me. My team respected the work we'd done together. Then Trent sent out a meeting invitation for a Westfield strategy session. My name wasn't on the list. I stared at my screen, convinced it was an oversight. When I mentioned it to him in the hallway, he looked at me with practiced surprise. "Oh, Maya. I thought you were already overloaded." "We're trying to lighten your workload," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Then he turned and walked away before I could respond. That afternoon, I overheard him tell Marcus from accounting, "Maya gets overwhelmed easily. Better not to pile too much on her plate." People glanced at me with uncomfortable sympathy. I kept my face carefully neutral, but inside, something cold settled in my chest. 2 weeks later, Trent announced that Vanessa Reed would be promoted to senior project lead. Vanessa had been with the company for 3 years. She was competent, friendly, and completely unprepared for a leadership role she hadn't asked for. I watched her face during the announcement meeting. She looked shocked, then uncomfortable, her eyes finding mine across the room with an expression that clearly said she knew this wasn't right. After the meeting, she cornered me near the elevators. "Maya, I didn't ask for this. I don't even know why he chose me. You should have that position." "It's okay," I replied, forcing a smile that made my jaw ache. "Congratulations. You'll do great." The words tasted like ashes, but I wouldn't let Trent see me break. "Not yet." From across the lobby, I could see him watching us, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this. The realization made my hands curl into fists. Over the next few weeks, the isolation grew more calculated. My team members stopped coming to my desk for advice. Not because they didn't value my input anymore, but because Trent had made it clear that association with me was dangerous. I noticed him hovering near workstations, dropping casual comments just loud enough for others to hear. Maya's methods are a bit outdated. We're moving in a different direction now. She means well, but she's not really aligned with where leadership wants to go. Each phrase was carefully chosen, subtle enough to avoid sounding like outright criticism, but devastating in its cumulative effect. He was systematically dismantling my reputation, one quiet conversation at a time. People who'd once sought my guidance now hesitated before approaching me. The confidence in their eyes when they looked my way had been replaced with uncertainty, sometimes pity. It was like watching my professional identity dissolve in slow motion. 3 weeks before the public humiliation, I stayed late finishing a report Trent had dumped on my desk at 4:30. The office was empty, the overhead lights dimmed to night mode, my desk lamp creating a small pool of yellow light in the darkness. Around 8 o'clock, I heard Trent's voice from his office. His door was slightly open, lights off, but I could see the blue glow of his phone screen. He was pacing, speaking in a low, tense whisper. "She's too respected here. People listen to her more than they listen to me." There was a pause. "I need her credibility destroyed before the restructuring announcement. Once that happens, she'll be the first one cut." My fingers froze on my keyboard. The report I'd been working on suddenly seemed meaningless. This wasn't about my performance. This wasn't about loyalty or alignment or any of the excuses he'd been spreading. This was deliberate sabotage. And I'd walked into it completely blind. The Thursday before the conference room incident, Trent asked me to prepare a section of the quarterly presentation. It was the first time in weeks he'd directly requested my involvement in something important. "I need your expertise on the client retention metrics," he'd said, his tone almost friendly. "You built that program. You should present it." I spent hours perfecting those slides, pulling together data that demonstrated the program's impact, creating visualizations that told the story clearly and compellingly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I'd misread the situation. Maybe he was finally recognizing my value. Friday morning, I arrived early for the presentation, my notes organized, my confidence cautiously returning. But when I opened the presentation file on the conference room computer, my slides were gone. Completely removed. Trent walked in seconds later, his expression perfectly calibrated to look surprised. "Maya, what are you doing? Those sections weren't your responsibility." Around the room, executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. He'd set me up perfectly, and I'd walked right into it. Which brought me back to that conference room, standing in front of 30 people while Trent announced I was being removed from my own project. My project. The one I'd built from scratch, the one that had saved 3 major accounts and generated revenue that kept our department profitable. I tried to speak, my voice shaking. "Trent, I think there's been a misunderstanding about." "Let's move on," he cut me off, not even looking in my direction. "Vanessa will be taking over all of Maya's responsibilities on Westfield. We need fresh energy on this." Fresh energy. The phrase was a slap. I'd given 7 years of my life to this company, poured everything I had into making it better, and now I was being dismissed as stale, disloyal, inadequate. The meeting continued around me, but I didn't hear any of it. My vision blurred at the edges. My hands trembled. I needed to get out of that room before I completely fell apart in front of everyone. I made it to the stairwell before the tears came. My hand shook on the cold metal railing as I sank onto the concrete steps, my breath coming in short gasps. The humiliation crashed over me in waves. 7 years. 7 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of proving myself over and over. And it had taken Trent 6 weeks to destroy it all. But beneath the hurt, something else was building. Something cold and sharp and focused. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you do stupid things. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind you can sharpen into a weapon. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, took a deep breath, and stood up. My reflection looked back at me from the small window in the stairwell door. Disheveled, but not broken. Hurt, but not defeated. Trent thought he'd won. He thought he'd crushed me. He had no idea he'd just lit a fuse he couldn't put out. I didn't quit. I didn't send an angry email. I didn't march into his office demanding answers or apologies. Instead, I went home, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop. Then I called my uncle. Theo Sinclair was many things: brilliant, private, occasionally difficult. He'd built a technology investment portfolio that most people in the industry didn't even know existed. He preferred the shadows, the silent influence, the power that came from being underestimated. To the world, he was a reclusive consultant. To me, he was the man who'd raised me after my parents died when I was 12. The only real parent I'd ever known. And he owned Innovations Tech. Not publicly. Not obviously. But through a carefully structured network of holding companies and silent partnerships, he controlled the majority stake in the company that had just humiliated me. Trent had absolutely no idea who really signed his paychecks. "Uncle Theo," I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to tell you what happened today." I laid it out calmly, chronologically, without emotion. The systematic isolation. The stolen credit. The public humiliation. I didn't ask him to fix it. I didn't ask him to intervene. I just gave him the facts. The silence that followed was long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "Continue doing exactly what you've been doing. Do not react. Do not resign. Let him continue talking, continue making his moves. Document everything, but don't change your behavior at all." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "Not yet. But men like Trent Hoffman always overreach. When he does, I want a complete record. Can you do that?" I understood exactly what he was asking. Yes. Good. Maya, remember something. You don't need to fight battles you've already won. You just need to wait for the other person to realize they've lost. Monday morning, I returned to work with a notebook. Not the company-issued kind everyone used for meetings. A small, personal journal that stayed in my bag. Every exclusion got recorded. Every casual insult. Every meeting where Trent undermined my work or questioned my judgment in front of others. I noted dates, times, witnesses. I saved emails. I backed up files. I created a timeline that showed the pattern clearly. I wasn't doing it for HR. HR answered to executives, and Trent was an executive. This documentation was for something much bigger. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and my work impeccable. When Trent excluded me from meetings, I documented it and moved on. When he gave me impossible deadlines, I met them. When he tried to provoke a reaction, I gave him nothing but professional courtesy. The calm seemed to frustrate him more than anger would have. He'd expected me to fight back, to give him ammunition. My silence was unnerving him. 2 weeks after the conference room incident, Trent made his first real mistake. He submitted a proposal to the executive board using a document I'd created. Not just inspired by my work. My actual document, with my name removed and his inserted in its place. But he'd forgotten about metadata. Every document in our system tracked the original author, creation date, and revision history. When he sent it to the board, that information went with it. Within hours, my uncle sent me a simple text message, noted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The wheels were already in motion, invisible but inevitable. Trent had no idea he'd just handed me the first solid piece of evidence that he wasn't just difficult, he was actively dishonest. I saved a copy of the document and its metadata trail to 3 separate locations. Then I went back to work as if nothing had happened. Trent's behavior grew bolder as the weeks passed. In breakroom conversations, he started openly criticizing what he called the old guard people who'd been with the company before he arrived. He didn't use names, but everyone knew who he meant. This company was coasting on outdated methods, he announced one morning, coffee cup in hand, speaking to a small group but loud enough for the whole floor to hear. The previous leadership was incompetent. We're cleaning house, bringing in people who actually understand modern business. What he didn't know was that the previous leadership he was insulting owned 62% of the voting shares through various investment vehicles. My uncle had built this company from a startup into an industry leader, then quietly stepped back, letting others take the public credit while he maintained control. Trent thought he was speaking to subordinates. He had no idea he was insulting his actual boss within earshot of people who knew exactly who that boss was. The first sign that Trent's world was shifting came during a Monday morning executive meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but Vanessa told me about it later in hushed tones near the copy machine. There was someone new at the meeting, she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Older man, didn't say much, just sat at the head of the table taking notes. Trent looked really uncomfortable. He kept stumbling over his words, getting defensive about project timelines. Did anyone say who he was? I asked, keeping my voice neutral even though my heart was racing. Board representative or something. But Trent looked scared. I've never seen him look scared before. That was my uncle. I'd recognize that description anywhere. He was starting to apply pressure, just enough to make Trent nervous without revealing why. After that meeting, Trent's mood turned dark. He snapped at 3 people before lunch, sent passive-aggressive emails about missed deadlines that weren't actually missed, and spent long periods in his office with the door closed. 3 days later, I submitted a comprehensive proposal for expanding our client retention program to new markets. It was solid work, backed by research and financial projections, formatted according to company standards. I sent it directly to Trent's email with a polite note requesting his review. He rejected it in 4 minutes. Not with feedback or suggestions. Just a brief email, not aligned with current strategic direction. Declined. But here's what Trent didn't know. Every document in our system automatically saved to a shared server that the board had access to. And every document tracked its full history, including who viewed it, when they viewed it, and what they did with it. Trent had spent less than 4 minutes looking at a 20-page proposal before rejecting it. Then, 2 hours later, he submitted his own proposal to the board. A proposal that was 90% identical to mine, with only the author name changed. The metadata logged everything. And my uncle saw it all. The mandatory meeting invitation appeared in everyone's inbox on a Thursday afternoon. No agenda. No explanation. Just a time, a location, and a note that attendance was required. Around me, co-workers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't normal procedure. Emergency meetings happened, but they always came with context, some hint about what needed to be addressed. I watched Trent's face when he read the invitation. His jaw clenched. His hand tightened around his phone. Whatever this meeting was about, he knew it wasn't good for him. I felt nothing. No anxiety, no anticipation, no satisfaction. Just a strange, calm certainty that pieces were falling into place exactly as they needed to. I'd spent 6 weeks documenting everything while maintaining perfect professionalism. Whatever happened next, I'd already won by refusing to give Trent the reaction he'd wanted. Friday morning, we filed into the main conference room. The entire leadership team was there, plus several people I didn't recognize. They sat at the head of the table, folders spread in front of them, expressions serious and unreadable. My uncle sat among them, his face neutral. To anyone who didn't know him, he looked like just another board representative. But I recognized the slight tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed once against the table edge. He was angry. Quietly, carefully angry. Trent sat across from me, his posture stiff, his face carefully controlled. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the strangers at the head of the table. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming. We need to address some concerns that have been brought to the board's attention regarding leadership conduct and document authenticity. Trent's face went pale. He knew. He didn't know how much they knew, but he knew this was about him. The next hour was methodical and devastating. The board chairwoman pulled up emails on the projection screen. Then document metadata. Then the side-by-side comparison of my original proposal and Trent's submitted version. "Mr. Hoffman," she said, her voice perfectly professional, "can you explain why your proposal to the board shows Maya Sinclair as the original document author, with a creation date 2 weeks before you submitted it under your name?" Trent stammered, his practiced confidence crumbling. "That must be a system error. I created that proposal from scratch based on departmental data. The system logs show you accessed Maya's original document, made minimal changes, and resubmitted it. The revision history is quite clear." He tried to blame an intern. Then he claimed it was a miscommunication. Then he suggested the metadata was somehow corrupted. Each excuse sounded more desperate than the last. Around the table, executives exchanged glances. Nobody was buying it. I sat quietly in my chair, my hands folded in my lap, watching the careful facade he'd built collapse under the weight of evidence he didn't know existed. Then the chairwoman turned to my uncle. "Mr. Sinclair, you've been reviewing this situation. What's your assessment?" Trent's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "Sinclair?" He looked between my uncle and me, the connection finally clicking into place. My uncle removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and looked directly at Trent. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely clear. "Mr. Hoffman, I personally hired you 6 weeks ago based on an impressive resume and strong references. What I didn't anticipate was that you would spend those 6 weeks systematically attempting to destroy the career of the most valuable employee this company has." He paused, letting that sink in. "The person you've been undermining, excluding, and publicly humiliating is my niece. More importantly, she's someone whose integrity and competence I've witnessed personally for years." Trent's face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My uncle continued, "You've made the mistake of attacking the one person in this building whose work I know intimately and whose character is beyond question. Trent found his voice, though it came out shaky and desperate. "Mr. Sinclair, I had no idea. There's been a misunderstanding. I was trying to push for excellence, to raise standards. Sometimes my management style comes across as harsh, but it's all in service of—" "Stop," my uncle interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was about management style. We have 6 weeks of documentation showing a pattern of deliberate sabotage. Stolen work. False accusations. Systematic isolation. That's not management. That's malice." The chairwoman placed a folder in front of Trent. "These are the formal complaints and evidence compiled by both Maya and several of your other team members who came forward once they learned about this investigation. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." Trent looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might defend him. He found only cold, professional stares. "This is unfair. You can't just—" "We can," the chairwoman said. "And we are. Please collect your personal belongings. HR will escort you from the building within the hour." After Trent left, escorted by 2 stone-faced HR representatives, the chairwoman turned to me. "Maya, on behalf of the board, I apologize for what you've endured. Your professionalism throughout this situation has been remarkable." "Thank you," I replied quietly. "We'd like to offer you Trent's position. Vice President of Operations, effective immediately, with a significant salary increase and full authority to rebuild the department culture." Around the table, executives nodded. It was a generous offer. 6 weeks ago, I would have been thrilled. But now, looking at that empty chair where Trent had sat, I felt nothing but exhaustion. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully. "But I think I need something different. Something new." My uncle's slight smile told me he'd anticipated this. "The board and I discussed alternatives. If you're interested, we have a partner company looking for someone to lead their expansion into new markets. It's a director-level position with more autonomy and, honestly, better growth potential than staying here." Now that was interesting. That felt like moving forward, not just filling the space someone toxic had occupied. 2 weeks later, I packed up my desk. Co-workers stopped by throughout the day, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner, others thanking me for handling the situation with grace they weren't sure they could have managed. Vanessa hugged me tightly. You taught me what real leadership looks like. Not the loud, aggressive kind. The quiet, competent kind that doesn't need to tear others down to feel powerful. You're going to be amazing, I told her. And hey, now you actually earned that promotion instead of having it handed to you as part of someone's political game. She laughed, though her eyes were wet. Call me when you're settled in the new role. I want to hear all about it. As I carried the box of my personal belongings to the elevator, I passed Trent's old office. The nameplate was gone, leaving just the ghost outline where it had been attached. Through the glass, I could see the office was already being cleaned out, prepared for whoever came next. My reflection stared back at me from that glass. I looked different than I had 6 weeks ago. Older, maybe. But also stronger. More certain. My first day at the new company felt like stepping into sunlight after months in shadow. The office was smaller, the team hungry and creative, the leadership actually interested in building something meaningful rather than playing power games. During my first week, my new boss asked me about my previous role. I heard you left a VP position on the table. That's unusual. What made you turn it down? I thought about how to answer that. About Trent's smug face in that conference room. About the weeks of isolation and humiliation. About the quiet satisfaction of watching him realize, too late, exactly who he'd been messing with. I learned that some victories aren't about claiming the throne the other person lost, I said finally. They're about recognizing when staying in that space means you're still living in their shadow. I wanted something clean. Something mine. She smiled. Well, we're glad you chose us. Now, tell me your vision for the expansion project. As I launched into the presentation I'd prepared, I realized something important. Trent hadn't just lost his job. He'd lost because he fundamentally misunderstood what power actually meant. Real power isn't about humiliating others or stealing credit. It's about being so undeniably competent that even when someone tries to destroy you, the truth simply refuses to stay buried. It's about knowing your worth and protecting it fiercely, not with drama or revenge, but with documentation and patience. Trent thought he'd won when he publicly stripped me of my project. But he'd actually lost the moment he decided I was someone he could safely destroy. Some people you just don't mess with. Not because they'll fight back loudly, but because they'll outlast you quietly, and when the dust settles, they'll still be standing while you're scrambling to explain how you ended up on the ground. 6 weeks of sabotage undone by simple truth. That was the real revenge. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just inevitable. And as I settled into my new office, looking out at a city full of possibilities, I realized that sometimes the best response to someone trying to tear you down isn't to fight back. It's to simply refuse to fall, keep your head high, and wait for them to trip over their own arrogance. Trent learned that lesson the hard way. I didn't need to destroy him. He destroyed himself. I just made sure someone was paying attention when he did.